A solitary individual with no genuine family connections, I was labelled a lonely loser by my brother during Christmas as he took my emergency fund. The room erupted in laughter, and everyone seemed to concur with his assessment. I merely nodded in silence, leaving without objection. 3 days later, when their access cards were declined, my voicemail was inundated with their frantic messages. At 34, I never anticipated that I would be the one to have the last laugh after enduring years as the family's scapegoat. To provide some context, I should start from the beginning. Growing up as the middle child between my older brother, 37, and younger sister, 30, was a challenging experience. From an early age, I was always perceived as the odd one, quieter, more reserved, and certainly less favoured. My father worked in construction, while my mother was a stay-at-home parent, though she devoted more time to her social engagements than to managing the household. My siblings were athletic, extroverted, and naturally adept at capturing our parents' attention, while I was bookish, introverted, and preferred to remain in the background. This dynamic became even more pronounced when I turned 13 and my parents discovered my journal, where I had expressed my thoughts on questioning my sexuality. They never read enough to realize that I ultimately concluded I was straight, but the damage was irreversible. From that moment on, I was regarded as the family's disappointment. My brother ascended to the status of the golden child, who could do no wrong. He excelled in high school football, received a partial scholarship to a state college, and was consistently lauded, even after he dropped out after 3 semesters. Meanwhile, my sister became the cherished princess, deserving of everything she desired. Meanwhile, I worked hard in school, earned a full scholarship to a good university, and graduated with honors and accounting achievements that were treated as expected rather than celebrated. What truly cemented my place as the family outcast was when I refused to give my brother $10,000 for his startup business selling protein supplements right after I graduated. It wasn't that I didn't want to help him, I simply didn't have that kind of money. I had student loans to pay off and was just starting my career. My parents called me selfish and told me I should be supporting family when the business predictably failed. 3 months later, I became the scapegoat for my brother's failure because I hadn't believed in him. Fast forward to this December, I had been living free for years, slowly building my savings and establishing myself at a mid-sized accounting firm. I wasn't wealthy by any means, but I was comfortable and had managed to put away a decent emergency fund. My siblings, meanwhile, seemed to bounce from one financial crisis to another, constantly bailed out by our parents or other relatives. I arrived at our family Christmas gathering. With modest gifts for everyone as usual, I was mostly ignored as the family fondled over my brother's latest ventures and my sister's new relationship. The mood shifted when my mother asked my brother about his plans for the new year. Well, he announced, "I've been offered an amazing investment opportunity. It's going to change everything for us." My father looked excited. "That's wonderful. What is it?" "It's a franchise opportunity, very exclusive, only being offered to people with the right connections." My brother explained vaguely. "The initial investment is $50,000, but it'll pay for itself within 6 months. I try to hide my skepticism. This sounded exactly like the protein supplement business, the crypto investment scheme, and the exclusive real estate seminar that had all failed spectacularly. "That's amazing." My mother gushed. "Do you have the money?" My brother's face fell dramatically. "Almost. I've saved $115,000 and I can get another $10,000 from a buddy, but I'm still short." Everyone's eyes slowly turned to me. I felt a cold sensation in my stomach. "What about you?" my father asked. "You're always saving." I cleared my throat. "I don't have that kind of money to invest right now." My brother scoffed. "Come on, we all know you're sitting on a pile of cash. You never spend anything because you have no life." "That's not true," I said quietly. "I have financial responsibilities and plans for my savings." "What plans?" My sister joined in. "It's not like you have a family to provide for or anything." My mother sighed. "Honey, this is your brother's big chance. Don't you want him to succeed?" "I do." But nothing," my father interrupted. "Family helps family. How much do you have in savings right now?" I hesitated. "About $30,000, but that's my emergency fund, and see, My brother exclaimed, "You have more than enough. I only need $25,000 to reach my goal. I can't just give you $25,000. I protested. That's almost everything. I've saved. The atmosphere in the room turned cold. My brother stood up and walked over to where my coat was hanging before I could react. He reached into the inside pocket and pulled out my wallet. "What are you doing?" I asked, stunned. "Just checking something," he replied casually, opening my wallet and pulling out my bank card. "This is your main account, right? The one with all your precious savings." I stood up. "Put that back." Now my brother laughed and held the card up. "Just a lonely loser with no real family," he announced mockingly, warding his money while the rest of us struggle. "What kind of person does that?" Everyone in the room laughed. My mother, my father, my sister even, my aunt and uncle who had been quietly watching the scene unfold. "He's always been selfish," my sister chimed in. "Remember when he wouldn't help with the protein business? That could have been huge." I looked around the room, seeing nothing but judgment and entitlement on their faces, years of being the family punching bag. The reliable one they only called when they needed something. The one whose achievements were dismissed and whose boundaries were trampled. It all crystallized in that moment. I didn't argue. I didn't fight. I simply nodded, stood up and walked toward the door. "Where you going?" My mother called out. "Home." I replied calmly. "Merry Christmas." My brother was still holding my bank card. "What about this? Don't you want it back?" I looked at him and shrugged. "Keep it. Consider it my Christmas gift to you." My father nodded approvingly. "That's more like it, family first." I walked out without another word, got into my car, and drove 3 blocks away before pulling over. My hands were shaking, but not from fear or anger. For the first time in my life, I felt a strange sense of clarity. I took out my phone and made one call. Not to the police, not to a friend, but to my bank. "Hello. I need to report my card stolen and freeze my accounts immediately," I said, "and I need to remove several authorized users from all my accounts." You see, what my family didn't know was that years ago, when my mother had medical issues and my father had been temporarily laid off, I had added them as authorized users on my accounts to help them through that rough patch. They hadn't needed to use the access in years, but they'd never been removed. My brother and sister had also been added during various emergencies. I had always been the family safety net, quietly, helping when needed without recognition. After securing my accounts, I called my boss, who was also a mentor and friend. I explained the situation and asked for a week off to handle personal matters. He agreed immediately. Then I drove home, packed a bag and checked into a hotel. I needed space to think and plan my next steps without any interference from my family. Over the next 3 days, I methodically separated my finances from my family's. I closed joint accounts, removed authorized users, and opened new accounts at a different bank. I consulted with a lawyer about protecting my assets and establishing clear boundaries. I even began looking at apartments in a different part of town. On the 3rd day after Christmas, I received the first text message from my brother. "WTF? Did you do my card was declined." I didn't respond. Then came a message from my sister. "The bank says I'm not authorized on your accounts anymore. I needed that money for rent again." I didn't respond. My phone began ringing constantly. First my siblings, then my parents, then extended family members. I let everything go to voicemail by the evening. My inbox was full of increasingly desperate messages. "This isn't funny anymore. I need access to transfer the investment. Money. Your father and I raised you better than this. Call us immediately. I'm going to lose my apartment if you don't help me. Is that what you want, son? Whatever point you're trying to make, you've made it. Now stop this nonsense." The messages continued, for days growing more desperate and then angry. I remained silent, focusing on rebuilding my life without their constant drain on my resources and emotional well-being. Week after Christmas, I finally responded with a single text message to my family. Group chat. "I've decided to respect your opinion of me as a lonely loser with no real family. As such, I will no longer be providing financial support to any of you. Please do not contact me again unless you're prepared to treat me with the basic respect I deserve." The response was immediate and explosive. My phone lit up with calls and messages ranging from apologies to threats. My mother insisted that my brother had been joking, that I was overreacting, that family forgives and forgets. My father demanded that I stop acting like a child and do the right thing. My sister vacillated between tearful pleas about being evicted and venomous accusations about my character. My brother, however, took a different approach. He showed up at my workplace the next day, causing a scene in the lobby. Security was called, and he was escorted out, but not before shouting that I was destroying the family with my selfishness. My boss called me into his office afterward. I expected a reprimand, but instead, he offered support. "I've known you for years," he said. "You're one of the most responsible and hardworking people I've ever met, whatever's happening with your family. I trust your judgment." That vote of confidence meant more to me than he could know. For years, I had internalized my family's narrative that I was the problem, too serious, too frugal, too different. Having someone see me clearly was a powerful antidote to those poisonous beliefs. 2 weeks after Christmas, my aunt, my mother's sister, reached out with an unexpected message. "I owe you an apology. I watched them take advantage of you for years and said nothing. What they did at Christmas was wrong, and I'm ashamed. I didn't speak up." Her honesty opened the door to a conversation I hadn't expected to have. She revealed the behind the scenes. My family had been systematically exploiting my financial stability. My brother had bragged about how easy it was to get money from me. My parents had discussed my savings as if it were a family emergency fund, rather than my personal safety net. My sister had borrowed money without my knowledge through her authorized access to my accounts. "They're not bad people," my aunt said, "but they've developed bad habits because you've always been there to clean up their messes." I wasn't sure I agreed with the first part of her statement, but the second rang true. By always being the responsible one, I had enabled their irresponsibility. By never setting firm boundaries, I had allowed them to treat me as an ATM rather than a person. A month after the Christmas incident, I received a formal letter from a lawyer representing my parents. It claimed that I had verbally agreed to provide financial support and that they had made financial decisions based on that promise. It demanded that I restore their access to my accounts and provide the $25,000 my brother needed for his business venture. My own lawyer responded with a brief letter stating that no such agreement existed, that any previous financial support had been given voluntarily, and that any further harassment would result in legal action. The threat of a lawsuit hung in the air for several weeks, but nothing materialized. I later learned through my aunt that my parents had consulted with multiple lawyers, all of whom had told them they had no case. My brother's amazing investment opportunity turned out to be exactly what I had suspected, a multi-level marketing scheme thinly disguised as a franchise. When he couldn't come up with the money, he lost his spot and spent weeks raging about how I had ruined his chance at success. My sister eventually found a roommate to help with her rent, though she continued to blame me for her financial struggles. My parents dipped into their retirement savings to cover some unexpected expenses, something they could have avoided if they'd been more financially responsible over the years. As for me, I moved to a new apartment in a quieter neighborhood, changed my phone number and limited my social media presence. I started seeing a therapist to work through the complex emotions surrounding my family dynamics and began building deeper connections with friends who valued me for who I was not, what I could provide. 6 months after the Christmas incident, I received an email from my mother. Unlike the angry demands and manipulative pleas from before, this message seemed genuinely reflective. "I've been thinking about what happened at Christmas and everything that followed. Your father and I didn't handle things well. We've gotten too comfortable relying on you as our safety net, and we took your generosity for granted. I'm not asking for money or forgiveness right now. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for how things unfolded." I read the email several times, searching for the usual manipulation tactics, but found none. I didn't respond immediately, giving myself time to process my feelings. Eventually, I sent a brief acknowledgement, Thank you for your apology. I need more time before I can consider rebuilding any kind of relationship. My brother never apologized. He continued to blame me for his failures, telling anyone who would listen that I had sabotaged his business opportunities. Out of jealousy, my sister eventually sent a text message that said, "I still think you overreacted, but I miss having you around." It wasn't exactly an apology, but it was something nearly a year has since that Christmas gathering. I have cultivated a stable life, free from the incessant burden of my family's financial crises. My career has flourished without the interference of their turmoil. I have even begun dating someone who honors my boundaries and appreciates my responsible outlook on life. Occasionally, I reflect on the incident when my brother took a card from my wallet that day, envisioning him attempting to use it, assured of his control over me, only to have it declined. I can picture the dawning realization among my family that their safety net had finally reached its limit regarding their entitled behavior. The emergency fund they sought to exploit has now grown even larger, securely placed in accounts they can never access. The so-called lonely loser, devoid of a genuine family, has proven to be stronger and more resilient than they ever anticipated. I am uncertain about the future of my relationship with my family. Perhaps with time and sincere change on their part, some form of limited contact may be feasible. However, I am resolute in my decision to never again allow them to diminish my worth or exploit my responsible nature. Sometimes, the most empowering choice is to simply walk away and allow individuals to face the repercussions of their actions. In my situation, this has meant observing from afar as my family finally confronts the reality I had shielded them from for years. That actions have consequences and that respect must be mutual. While that Christmas may have cost me my family, it has bestowed upon me something far more precious: self-respect.